Mr. President, given the importance of human rights to my country, I request that the UN Human Rights Council initiate a credible and independent investigation of alleged human rights violations in West Papua.
MSJ continues to follow the question of New Caledonia on the United Nations agenda. We wish the people of New Caledonia all the best as they prepare to decide on their political future in 2018. Solomon Islands reaffirms its support for the inalienable right of the people of the territory of French Polynesia, pursuant to annual resolutions of the General Assembly beginning in 2013. And Solomon Islands continues to request the administrating power to work and cooperate with the United Nations Special Committee on the question of French Polynesia, and hope a C-24 visit will happen soon. Mr. President, Solomon Islands is gravely concerned about the human rights violation against Melanesians in West Papua. Human rights violations in West Papua and the pursuit for self-determination of West Papua are two sides of the same coin. Many reports on human rights violations in West Papua emphasize the inherent corroboration between the right of self-determination that results in direct violation of human rights by Indonesia and its attempts to smother any form of opposition. The principle of sovereignty, Mr. President, is paramount in any institution whose core rationale is the respect for sovereignty. Now, if the jurisdiction of sovereignty rests on a series of decisions that are questionable, then there is a case to challenge the legality of the argument of sovereignty, as is the case of the New York Agreement and the Act of Free Choice. Solomon Islands adds its voice to those of other member countries and civil society organizations who are concerned about human rights violation in the Papua and West Papua regions of Indonesia. As the chair of the Melanesian Spirit Group, that includes Indonesia as an associate member and the United Liberation Movement of West Papua as an observer, Solomon Islands affirms the need for constructive engagement with Indonesia and looks forward to cooperating with Indonesia to address the violation of human rights in West Papua.
In the same way, the principle of self-determination must all be respected and honored. The violation of human rights in West Papua and their desire to achieve self-determination is a reality that this great body, this great hall, cannot continue to ignore. It must take this into account. It must not allow actions in the guise of principles of non-interference and sovereignty as reasons for inaction. The UN must act on this issue and find a workable solution to give autonomy to the indigenous peoples of West Papua.
La décolonisation est encore un problème clé qui exige nos efforts collectifs pour faire de l'autodétermination du peuple une réalité, comme l'exige la Charte des Nations Unies. Nous devons exprimer notre solidarité et notre engagement pour éradiquer le colonialisme sous toutes ses formes. À cet égard, Monsieur le Président, j'ai le plaisir de constater que les Nations Unies aident la Nouvelle-Calédonie avec ses listes électorales. J'espère que les controverses entourant les listes électorales seront résolues à l'amiable entre les parties concernées et que le prochain référendum donnera un résultat juste, transparent et apaisé. Il appartient désormais aux Calédoniens de choisir librement leur futur statut d'autodétermination. Nous, les dirigeants des îles du Pacifique, lors de la réunion récente des leaders du Forum aux États fédérés de la Micronésie, nous avons accepté la Nouvelle-Calédonie et la Polynésie française tant que membres à part entière du Forum des îles du Pacifique, en dépit de leur statut de territoire non indépendant. Il s'agit là d'une étape majeure sur la voie de l'intégration régionale et l'unification des pays des îles du Pacifique, n'abandonnant personne dans la lutte contre les impacts du changement climatique, la pêche illégale, la création d'opportunités économiques grâce au commerce et à des liens économiques renforcés et plus ouvert. Monsieur le Président, la question des droits de l'homme doit rester en tête de l'agenda des Nations Unies. Le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, M. Ban Ki-moon, nous rappelait en 2012 que les droits de l'homme étaient inaliénables et constituaient un principe fondamental des Nations Unies. En tant que membre des Nations Unies, il est de notre devoir de demander que ces paroles soient traduites en actions concrètes. Monsieur le Président, les problèmes des droits de l'homme en Papouasie occidentale restent encore en suspens. Je me tiens encore sur ce podium, comme ont fait mes prédécesseurs, avec la même conviction morale, exhortant les Nations Unies à prendre des mesures concrètes pour résoudre cette question, et mes collègues dirigeants appuyer le plaidoyer des Papous occidentaux. Les Nations Unies ne doivent pas se voiler la face sur les abus en matière de droits de l'homme dans la province de la Papouasie occidentale. Le peuple de la Papouasie occidentale se tourne vers les Nations Unies pour une lueur d'espoir, un espoir de liberté dans l'exercice de leurs droits sur leur propre terre pour affirmer librement leur identité. J'exhorte les Nations Unies d'en faire un volet de son initiative, les droits humains avant tout.
Nauru is deeply concerned regarding the situation in West Papua, including the alleged human rights abuses. As emphasized in the Pacific Islands Forum communique, it is important that there be an open and constructive dialogue with Indonesia on this matter.
Mr. President, a little closer to home, we express for the welfare of the Pacific peoples that residents and citizens in the province of Western Papua, Indonesia. Last year, on this same podium, I stood here and spoke about human rights abuses taking place in Indonesia-ruled West Papua. In the year that has passed, nothing appears to have changed in that place. I use the word appears intentionally because now we still have no way of knowing exactly what is going on in there. Probably something is definitely wrong. Nearly half a century ago, when I was a young man anymore, I had learned, as many others in the region had done, that a wrong was done to the West Papuans. I'm not a young man. I have struggled against great odds much of my life for justice and democracy in my land. In the Christian faith, an universal truism is espoused through the story of the Good Samaritan. After seeing a badly injured man stripped of his clothing, who was a victim of a robbery lying in the sun by the road, without reservation or hesitation or consideration to religious or cultural restriction or biasness, this Samaritan's first reaction was to help the man from his suffering, to clothe him and to nurse him to health. He took the man and put him in a logical accommodation where the injured man could recover. Tonga has probably neighborly concern for the welfare of the indigenous people of West Papua, as called for by a decision of our recent meeting of the Pacific Island Forum leaders earlier this month in the Federated States of Micronesia. Tonga supports the call for an open and constructive dialogue with Indonesia regarding the status and welfare of the people of West Papua. As a concerned neighbor, Tonga also calls on Indonesia as a forum dialogue partner to work with it and other Pacific Island Forum countries to facilitate this decision. of our fellow leaders, either bilaterally or through United Nations mechanisms.
We join others to advocate for an amenable resolution to the problem in West Papua through meaningful and constructive dialogue.
Mr. President, Indonesia would like to exercise our right of reply to the statements delivered by Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, echoed by Nauru, Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, and Tonga, regarding matters concerning Papua, a province of Indonesia. Indonesia is shocked to hear that at this important stage, where leaders gather in this august body to address the early implementation of SDGs, the transformation of our collective actions, and other global challenges such as climate change, of which the Pacific countries are affected the most, the state leaders chose instead to violate the UN Charter by interfering in other countries' sovereignty and violating its territorial integrity. We categorically reject the continuing insinuations in their statements. They clearly reflect an unfortunate lack of understanding of the history, current situation, and progressive developments in Indonesia, including in the provinces of Papua and West Papua, and also an unfriendly and rhetoric political maneuver. Their politically motivated statements were designed to support separatist groups in the said provinces who have consistently engaged in inciting public disorder and in conducting armed terrorist attacks upon civilians and security personnel. Evidently, the statement made by those countries clearly violates the purposes and objectives of the UN Charter and the principle of international law on friendly relations among states, as well as the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. I repeat, it is a violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. It is highly regrettable and dangerous for states to misuse the United Nations, including this August Assembly. These countries are using the General Assembly to advance their domestic agenda and for some countries to divert attention from political and social problems at home. The said countries are also using false and fabricated information as the basis of their statement. The conducts of these countries undermine the UN Charter and are detrimental to the credibility of this Assembly. Mr. President, Indonesia's commitment to protection of human rights is unquestionable. Indonesia is a founding member of the Human Rights Council. Indonesia has sat as member of the Council for 3 previous periods and is currently a member of the Council for the 4th time. Indonesia is the initiator of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights and OIC Independent Permanent Commission of Human Rights. Indonesia has ratified 8 out of 9 core international human rights instruments, all incorporated into our national legal system. In compared, 4 by Solomon Islands and 5 by Vanuatu. Indonesia is among few countries who have a continued national action plan on human rights and currently is on its 4th generation of the plan from 2015 to 2019. Indonesia has an active and robust National Commission on Human Rights since 1993, vibrant civil society and free media. Indonesia is also a country with full-fledged democracy in function. With such a vibrant national democracy, coupled with the highest commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights at all levels, it would be nearly impossible for any human rights allegations to go unnoticed and unscrutinized. Mr. President, we reaffirm that there are domestic mechanisms in place at the national level in Indonesia, as well as at the provincial level in Papua and West Papua. For our part, Indonesia will continue to give appropriate focus to the development of Papua and West Papua provinces, and to the best interest of all. In conclusion, Mr. President, we have a saying in our Asia-Pacific region: when one points the index finger to others, the thumb finger automatically points to one's own face. I thank you.
Greetings and Ocean for Peace. Solomon Islands would like to exercise its right of reply to the statement by Indonesia regarding the ongoing human rights violations of the Melanesian people in West Papua. Mr. President, Solomon Islands notes Indonesia's right of reply regarding the efforts made by the Indonesian government to establish human rights monitoring mechanisms and other avenues to ensuring that human rights violations in West Papua are addressed. We note that Indonesia ratified the Convention Against Torture in 1998, but to date it has not been able to harmonize the law to include the definition of torture, let alone to criminalize and punish torture. Furthermore, Indonesia has not submitted its period report to the Committee Against Torture since 2008. Mr. President, the Solomon Islands delegation receives reports from respectable sources of fellow UN member states and moral leaders from civil society, illustrating a lack of protection of human rights of Melanesian people of West Papua. In this regard, Mr. President, Solomon Islands therefore invites Indonesia to substantiate its allegations that the Solomon Islands, together with the 5 other Pacific Island delegations, have used false and fabricated information by allowing UN special rapporteurs mandated by the UN Human Rights Council to visit West Papua and Papua. Our concern has to do with the increasing loss of lives at the hand of Indonesian authorities. We may argue and concede that mistakes are made and that lives are lost as a consequence. But, Mr. President, how can we as members of this august body, the defender of human rights and the body of reference in ethical and moral values, turn a blind eye to the deaths of more than 500,000 West Papuans over the course of the last 50 years? As an island country from a region that Indonesia claims to be a part of, Solomon Islands cannot stand behind the argument of sovereignty and integrity of any country and watch such atrocities take place. It is our moral and ethical duty as members of this august body on gathering to bring this unfortunate reality to the fore and to, together, find a way to stop the loss of lives and protect the rights of all human beings, be they Melanesians or West Papua or any other. Furthermore, Mr. President, we come together to agree on certain rights and hold each other accountable to those rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 3, stipulates that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Also, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Indonesia has ratified, is also a binding legal instrument. Article 9 of this covenant reinforces the right to liberty and security of person. Article 3 of UNDHR entails a responsibility to protect all populations from mass atrocity, crimes, and human rights violations. In essence, Mr. President, we uphold the argument of sovereignty and national integrity. We, as UN members, should also hold other member states accountable to Article 3 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and Article 9 of the ICCPR. Mr. President, Indonesia has further clarified the many development challenges that we face as the Solomon Islands do. As is the case with the 5 other Pacific Island countries that were mentioned by Indonesia in its right of reply, as of today's, the others, including Palau, that's 6. Our challenges are difficult ones, and we know full well that we alone cannot and will not be able to resolve them. That is why we highlight these challenges here at this August body. In a similar vein, we highlight the human rights violations in West Papua because we realize that neither we nor Indonesia can resolve this matter alone. We are of the position that this matter needs to be brought to the attention of the body of the United Nations. And it needs to be done urgently as lives are being lost with all impunity. Mr. President, all lives matter. West Papuan lives matter. Mr. President, Solomon Island wishes to reiterate its willingness to have constructive engagements with Indonesia on the matter of West Papua. In fact, our Pacific regional and sub-regional bodies have indicated their willingness to discuss such matters with Indonesia, as we are all concerned about the increasing loss of lives in West Papua. Over the last 20-odd years, our Pacific Island countries have expressed the need for dialogue with Indonesia over human rights violations. In fact, over the last 18 months, the regional and sub-regional organization of the Pacific Island countries have made 3 attempts to have constructive engagements with Indonesia. Mr. President, the lack of will to engage from Indonesia will not dampen the commitment of Solomon Islands together with 6 other Pacific Island countries to pursue dialogue and constructive engagement, as they are the only means to resolving this matter. We understand that through constructive engagement and dialogue, we can realize the articles of the UN Charter and the subsequent international human rights instruments that Indonesia has ratified. In closing, Mr. President, the Solomon Islands welcomes the opportunity to highlight this case before this August body so that we, together and as a family of nations, can and must address the human rights violations and the loss of lives in West Papua. It impinges on us as members of the United Nations to cast aside all barriers so that further lives are not lost in West Papua. Mr. President, we are here to enable the divine purpose of the universe to unfold, for all life is sacred. I thank you for exhausting your patience, Mr. President.